In this session, we're going to take a look at GitHub. Now, you probably know what GitHub is. It's fairly popular, but in case you don't, I'm going to take a look at the Wikipedia article where we find that it's an internet hosting service for version control using Git. Okay. So one critical thing is that GitHub is not the version control software. It's a hosting service, a website that uses Git to allow you to store files on their servers and share them. And again, it's very popular. So the other part of this then is Git itself, which is actually the version control software. Now, you're probably wondering, maybe, what is version control? What's this all about? And especially in development, when we talk to the computer and we're trying to teach the computer things, we're going to go through a lot of iterations. We're going to tell it something. We're going to find it doesn't understand it, and so we're going to need to make some changes. We're also going to have a design in mind, and it doesn't work well to try to design the entire thing from the beginning before you ever start writing code, because you're going to learn a lot of things about the design when you start implementing it in code. So we implement some things, we test some things, and then we go back to our design, change some things, re-implement that, test that. And so it's an iterative process, and a lot of times we're trying to try things out that we don't know if they're going to work or not. We might want to go back to something we had. So the question is, how do we manage all these different versions of a file or multiple files? And one of the answers is version control. So let's first of all think about the folders and directories that you're familiar with. Okay, so I'm bringing up Windows Explorer here. I see a couple of folders and a file in here, my recording, and when we apply version control to a folder, we now call it a repository. Or you can turn that around and say that a repository is a version controlled folder or directory. Okay. And you are probably familiar with Google Docs, but you may not realize that Google Docs applies version control to all of their shares. And so you can go back and look at the history of your document. You can make comments. You can try things out. And all of the saving is done automatically. Git is a little bit different. While it can be set up to do it automatically, by default and really by design, Git allows us to control when we take snapshots of our code to remember and add some comments to them. So again, I'll harp more on that when we get there on that. But let's come over and take a look at Git itself. And I'm actually going to bring this up because many of you may have a GitHub account or not, but it's pretty easy if you don't. You come over to github.com and sign up or sign in. Either way, you'll get the option. You need an email address, and then you will pick an account name for that. Can I give that? So I'm logged into my account now. And one of the things to notice is keep track of the URL, because it's an easy way to navigate around without having to point and click on things all the time. GitHub.com is the address of GitHub's servers. And then you'll notice that / that path separator character, is followed by Joe's-TA in my case, which is my GitHub account name. And then I have these repositories, and each one of those is going to be a folder under Joe's TA. So on their servers, when you created your account, when I created mine, they created a folder with that account name, the Joe's TA in my case. And then every time I create a repository, it's going to be a subfolder under that. So let me jump into one of my repositories here. And notice in the path, github.com / Joe's-TA, that's my account name, / dev1240f22, which is my repository name. So again, easy way to navigate around just by typing in your repository name or an account name that you might know. Okay, now that we're in here, what we see is code, and I have a README file here. When you create a new repository, and maybe I should do that. So let me come back to my Joe's TA and say repositories. So there's an overview tab, repositories, projects, packages, some other things that GitHub does. And there's a button over here to create a new repository. Notice again, there is your username, the path separator character, and you can give it a repository name. It's going to create a folder with that. You can decide whether you want the repository to be publicly available or private. And here's where you can add a README, you can add a .gitignore, and a license file. So these are some of the files that GitHub will automatically populate for you if you choose to. The README is intended to be a file. It's going to show up on the repository's homepage, and it's to let somebody know what this repository is all about. And we noticed before a minute ago that that was readme.md, which is readme.md, which is short for Markdown, and Markdown is a markup syntax. So much like HTML is hypertext markup language, Markdown is a markup syntax. It all depends. Hopefully you have something to say first, and then you can mark it up with style. So you can add things like bold or italics, or make lists or so forth. But Markdown is intended to be as transparent as possible. So the markup is not much. In fact, if I click on the little pencil here to edit this README, we'll see that it's actually that sharp sign that made this a heading. So if I came over here and typed in another line that was not a sharp sign, I can cancel changes. You can play with some of the other things up here, but one of the things we'll notice is that, get my face out of the way, it's not saving the changes until we commit them. So, and every time we commit, we need to give it a commit message. Okay, that's important. I know it may seem like a pain in the butt sometimes, but there is an art to it. Good commit messages say something about the changes that were made, very briefly, but enough so that it'll jog your memory or someone else's memory, pique their interest when they go back and are looking for some history in here. So I'm going to say that I was playing with a sharp sign. Okay? And then I'll commit the changes. And so now we can see it shows up there. It's not in a heading, okay? It didn't have the sharp sign, so it didn't make it a larger, bolder font like the heading. And yeah, you can play with editing that. But again, those changes were made online. Later, we're going to look at using the Git tool to be able to make changes offline. But I want to come up here and say that, okay, we can add new files. You can edit files, add files here. And one of the other things we should be aware of is over here under security, insights, settings, we'll find that here's the general repository name. Some things you can do with that. There's some features and more stuff than I have time to go over now. But at the bottom of this page, in the danger zone, is where you can actually delete or archive a repository or transfer it to someone else. Okay? When you create a repository, you have ownership of that. You can create it to someone else. The other thing we can do, instead of having to give it to someone else, though, is we can add collaborators. So GitHub wants to make sure that I am who I say I am, that I am authorized to do this. So it wants my GitHub password. Before I can do this, and then we can say that, okay, right now this is a private repository, but I can add collaborators. I can add people to it and give them permissions. simply by typing in their GitHub username or their email or some way of searching and finding them. Okay, there's a bunch more stuff, but I think that's good for our first introduction to GitHub.